And so we enter our Advent journey to God's cradle, the baby Emmanuel, God with us. We begin our journey with hope. We begin in hope that the powers of the world will not have the last word. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. They're such iconic words. And like so many of the words that we say and sing in worship, they're so familiar that they become symbolic in ways that can transcend history and the theology that they express. Words of ritual and poetry often contain meaning beyond the sum of their parts, so to speak, and that meaning can shift and change over time for better and for worse. In this case, three little words that we have sung for centuries point to some troublesome history and theology. Ransom captive Israel. We're going to leave aside for today the sacrificial atonement theology that the word ransom points to, but take a few minutes to wonder about captive Israel. Does it refer to a moment in history, or is it intended as a timeless truth that has, unfortunately, fueled anti-Semitism? The days are surely coming, the prophet Jeremiah writes on God's behalf, to a people broken and despairing. Jeremiah preached through a most devastating and confusing time in the history of Israel, the demise of one empire and the rise of another. It marked a fundamental and irreversible change in the Israelite community. Jeremiah's career began in the time of the Israelite king Josiah, in the line of David, who instituted significant religious reform throughout the nation. Josiah's reforms were sweeping, but it could not turn the tide of international events that had Babylon rise to power throughout the region. The Babylonians swept through the ancient Near East with a mighty brutality, eventually laying siege to Jerusalem, burning the city, destroying Solomon's glorious temple, and killing or exiling Judah's rulers, the priests and the scribes. As one of the less important Judeans, Jeremiah was left behind in the devastated region until ongoing conflict meant that he too had to flee. It was the end of everything. Most notably, it was the end of God's unilateral promise of an everlasting kingdom for David. Jeremiah's preaching changed with the changing circumstances. His earlier warnings of judgment transformed into consolation and hope as the worst possible events occurred. The people were desperate to know if they were still God's people, if God's promises were still true, if God would ever truly love them again. Would their Babylonian captivity ever end? Would they ever know national independence again? What had become of God's promise to David? In the face of these deep questions, Jeremiah writes, "The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah." It was a word of hope in a hopeless situation. Admiral Jim Stockdale also knew about hopelessness and hope. He was the highest-ranking United States military officer in the Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp during the height of the Vietnam War. Best-selling author Jim Collins writes about him in his book, Good to Great. Tortured over 20 times during his 8-year imprisonment from 1965 to 1973, Collins describes, Stockdale lived out the war without any prisoner's rights, no set release date, and no certainty as to whether he would even survive to see his family again. When Collins asked Stockdale how he survived the uncertainty of his fate, the brutality of his captors, and so forth, Stockdale replied, "I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted that not only would I get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life. Who didn't make it out? Collins inquired further. Oh, that's easy, Stockdale said. The optimists. The optimists? I don't understand, asked a confused Collins. The optimists. Oh, they were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. Finally, Stockdale turned to Collins and said, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. It has become known as the Stockdale paradox. You must never lose faith that you will prevail in the end, and you must live with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality. In other words, hope and hopelessness must coexist, held together in paradoxical tension. When we look around our world today, it's easy to be struck or even held captive by hopelessness. We see authoritarian leaders of dubious character being elected to high office. We see the impact of climate change in large and small ways, and we know that there is no magic solution. We're learning that white supremacy and colonial power is the basis upon which our society has been built, with our church participating fully through it, and we struggle to figure out how to change it. There's the affordability crisis, the crisis of toxic drugs and addictions, the crisis of the unhoused here in our own city. What if this Advent we leaned into the hopelessness of it all, confronting the most brutal facts of our current reality, and embraced Jeremiah's encouragement to the ancient Israelite community in their historic captivity? The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. What could we do at the intersection of hope and hopelessness? O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel. We sang this as we entered Advent this morning, and historically speaking, the people of Israel knew captivity. It is not, however, a timeless truth, the timeless truth that it became in Christian theology known as supersessionism. That's the idea that Judaism has been superseded by Christ and the subsequent Christian church, and that Jewish people have been replaced by Christians as God's chosen. This idea is offensive and dangerous because it contributes to dehumanizing Jewish people and all the violence that goes with that. Instead, we might think the timeless truth of our need for God with us, for Emmanuel, to come and free us from all that holds us captive. Perhaps there's a timeless truth in our need for Emmanuel, God with us, in our hopelessness and in our hope, that the powers of the world will not have the last word. Perhaps the timeless truth is our need not only for life-giving words, but for the word that is life, Emmanuel, God with us.